Coach, talk about Trey Burton last week against Kentucky. Have you been wanting to put him in more and more, but waited until Alabama, since you have had Alabama, quote unquote, circled on the schedule since last December's loss to the University of Alabama? And how does Trey Burton stack up against the Alabama defense?
That's a great question. That's one I'm not going to answer because I can't do that right now. I think the thing they have over every other team in the country at this point is talent and experience. And so they would plus us a little bit of experience right now. But as far as talent, I kind of like where our team's at.
Well, there you have it. Coach Meyer today talking about the number 1 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide hosting his 8th ranked Florida Gators. It's a series that dates back to 1904, which had the Alabama Crimson Tide defeating Florida 29-0 in Tuscaloosa. Alabama all-time has 21 wins against Florida. Florida has 14 wins all-time against the University of Alabama. It should be quite a matchup. I do like the Crimson Tide coming into this game, but you know what? That's why they play the games, and it is 2 heavyweight teams. Nick Taylor, what's going on?
Nothing much. How you doing, Dan? You ready for this big top 10 showdown this weekend?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be much of a top 10 showdown compared to some other games out there. But, yeah, Nick Saban should get it done. But, you know, you got storylines out there now, especially with the 6'2", 219 freshman changing his jersey last week, putting Kentucky in a 14-0 hole by changing his number. It looks like a miniature Tim Tebow out there. But, you know what? That's what Urban Meyer does. He didn't want to talk much about Alabama coming into this season, but we all know that he's had Alabama on his mind since last December in Atlanta.
Oh, absolutely. And you can't blame him for that, but the only thing I think that some people blame him for, maybe even some of our viewers, is the fact that he dodges the question about Alabama being a historical game. Obviously, as you alluded to, his players made a point of that at media days, and Coach Meyer seems to try to sidestep that issue when he's confronted, although most coaches would probably do the same thing. I wish Coach Meyer would just state the obvious and let's get on with it, because even Coach Spurrier this morning alluded to the fact that Alabama and Florida were the 2 teams that dominated the conference right now. And when other coaches and
what's funny about you bringing up Coach Spurrier, I mean, we all know that Mike DuBose gave him a 34-7 defeat in Atlanta in 1999 for the SEC championship game. And I think Urban Meyer at least 2, maybe 3 times was brought up to 2005 game in which he lost 31-3 in his first season at Florida when they lost to Mike Shula and company in Tuscaloosa. And he kept saying over and over, quote, "I don't remember that game." How come Spurrier can man up and take his defeats like a 34-7 in a championship game, but all of a sudden, you know, Urban Meyer can't remember back to a different era, as he alluded to in 2005.
Well, I think it's obvious. I think the answer's obvious. I mean, first of all, Coach Meyer's record speaks for itself. He is a very good coach. But as far as his recollection of the 05 game, he just chooses not to remember that because he's a coach with an ego that wants to remember the Tebow era and the good times, and you know, and that's fine. I mean, there are other coaches out there like that too, so we're not just picking on Urban Meyer, but it's obvious that, you know, he clearly wants to remember the times when Florida is or was on top, and as the case may be, and that's fine. But obviously, Alabama killed Florida that day, and you know, it could happen again this weekend.
Well, yeah, he obviously does. Like he'll keep bringing up his record for the good times, like you just stated. I mean, look at the last season at Utah in the Fiesta Bowl. Why did he stay for that one extra game? Because that gave him a perfect season. I mean, look at Brian Kelly with class. He left an undefeated season on the table. Maybe he could have defeated a Florida last year. We don't know, but he took the high road into his new job at Notre Dame. But most coaches do that. They go ahead and go to that new job instead of sticking around for that bowl game. But you know, Urban Meyer, he just likes to add sentences to his overall resume.
Speaking of Coach Meyer going from Utah to Florida after the Fiesta Bowl, I'm not a huge Dan Mullen fan, but I do have to compliment Dan Mullen on one thing. When he took the Mississippi State job, you know, he had the opportunity to be offensive coordinator in Florida's national championship game. I believe it was against Oklahoma after they defeated Alabama in 2008. And he chose to go ahead and go to Starkville and start building the Mississippi State program. And for that, I will give Dan Mullen a tip of the cap, because the people in Starkville needed Dan Mullen there, and Dan Mullen did go to Starkville and start building his program at Mississippi State. So,
well, it's very similar to a David Cutcliffe situation. You know, Tennessee back in '98 was in the Fiesta Bowl national title game, and you know, he elected to go ahead and start building his program in the state of Mississippi as well. So yeah, you got to give hats off to people that do that, because you know, a national title game for some people is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Absolutely, but Dan was a part of the 06 team, and so he got to taste, you know, that when they did defeat Ohio State after the Ted Ginn injury. So maybe that played a role as well. But Dan did go to Mississippi State.
Well, speaking of Ted Ginn, of that game against Ohio State that year, the University of Florida is 3-7 all time in their history against #1 ranked teams. Their 3 victories were against Ohio State, 2008 in the SEC championship game against the University of Alabama, and also when they defeated Florida State the '96 season, '97 Sugar Bowl to claim Spurrier's national title. So the 3-7 overall. So we'll see what happens. I definitely see it going 3-8, and I guess that'll lead us into segue into the score predictions. What you got for this game Saturday, #1 versus #8?
I'm going to take Alabama by a score of 31-13. I think that's similar to what last year's score was, maybe even close to the same.
32-13 was last year. I'm going to go 34-17. I think it's going to be close for about a quarter and a half. I mean, like real tight. But I just think it's going to be a lot like that Alabama-Penn State game. I really do. I just can't see. I mean, this Burton kid that stepped up last week against Kentucky, it's going to be a nice little story. They're going to play some chess match early for about a quarter and a half, and I just see it like the Alabama-Penn State game. So I'm going to go 37-14.
Well, I think while we're on the subject, I do think Florida will win the East after losing this game, simply because the other teams in the East obviously have issues. The Georgia pick that we had was kind of ruined when A.J. Green was suspended. Otherwise, that Georgia team is right in the thick of things. Obviously, South Carolina took a defeat last week to a good Auburn team that they could have won.
Oh yeah, and definitely. I meant to say 34-17. Excuse me, but yeah, you're right. South Carolina and Florida both play Alabama, so essentially that's a loss apiece. So if they can both win out, and when they play each other, the winner of that game is probably going to win the East. So South Carolina is still not eliminated, so they can still get it done against Florida, just like he defeated Urban Meyer in his first season in Columbia. But that's going to wrap it up, Nick. So let's strap on, watch this great weekend of college football, and of course the big one on CBS Saturday night in Tuscaloosa.
Oregon and Stanford, big game also.